Must be on his way.
Oh,
Hi.
there we go.
Yep. Hi.
Ah,
There you go. Yep.
Hey,
Nice.
sorry, I'm
no
at
way.
Tower 2 in Sydney.
No,
So
no, you're right. No
Okay.
worries. I wasn't sure if you're at the what do you call it? That bar at the Marina Sands in Singapore, the one with the infinity edge pool or something.
yeah, I'm not that special yet, but one day we'll all go there together. Same day.
So it's good to have aspirational goals, isn't it, Cole?
That's it. That's it.
Sure. All right.
Okay.
Let's hit it, guys. So
All
there you go.
right.
And yeah, of course, we'll send you this as always. We are recording. The chat is now live.
You'll get the
And
slides and
yeah, and
everything's
we have
good.
slides and everything is wonderful. I think house rules go without saying. Adam, you're probably the only one that hasn't joined us before, so it's just the whole Chatham House.
What goes on tour stays on tour, people.
Exactly. The number one rule in my mind is don't take yourself too seriously, because you're a target for criticism in that case. So there you go. All right. So this month, people risk. We feel like this is something that gets absolutely done to death at times, and also I think we want to do it in a way where we're not immediately lumped into the basket with HR people that love to talk in endless models and formulas, none of which really actually work in real life. So we just wanted to talk you through our perspective on people risk and what are the emerging risk issues and what it's actually in a practical way going to mean for you guys as this space continues to develop. So, Bron.
Okay. And look, we had a really great kind of informal discussion on people risk at the June Community of Risk Management, and there was a lot of appetite to keep talking about it. So we thought today we kind of expand it. But what people risk really does, it really not only has our risk environment elevated the need for fantastic, robust, strategic, forward-looking risk management, this people risk one really does bring the need for HR and risk to work together. And so in my sort of corporate background, and certainly in HR, you would never go and meet with the risk guys about anything, but really this is something where they need to be working together, because there's just a lot emerging in this space and everything's changing so quickly. And James and I were just on a meeting with someone in Singapore just half an hour before this meeting, and we were talking about the amount of regulatory change to keep up with in this space. People risk is one of those things that feels like there's been that much regulatory change and enforcement over probably the last particular sort of 2 years. It's really good to try and keep up with it. But anyway, look, today we wanted to cover, when we were sort of trying to prep for this one, we felt the risks came at us in 3 different ways. So it was about risks to workers. It's about risks of worker action, so things your workers do that put your business at risk. And then all these other, I guess, general people risks as you go to run and grow your businesses. And then, of course, we wanted to have some discussion about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to say, so we, and thanks, a shout out to Andrew, and thanks for that great article by the evergreen Dave Tatum, who's I still think one of the OG legends of the sector. I'll flick the link. It was in Technology magazine. I think I'll flick the link, but I'll be quoting a couple of his quotes throughout this. And I think all I wanted to emphasize, Bron, was the risk of worker actions is really culture and conduct risk is what we're talking about there. Obviously, if you're in financial services, you know already how much of an issue that's been in the past, but it's really touching every sector these days, isn't it, Bron, really? And I think compared to the COVID period, we've moved well beyond the supply chain issues related to people risk in terms of what we experienced 2020 to 2022, and we've moved into a totally different landscape now. And just for those, Bron, do you mind, without going down the rabbit hole, give them the 10-second summary of that other discussion. So for those that weren't with us last time when we talked about this, I think where we landed it in a non-judgmental, nasty way, we viewed our generation collectively, who we're talking to in the room today, as having a key role or almost advocacy role to have for the millennials and the younger workers coming through to help them build better resilience and build an environment of improved productivity as we go into the next part of this century, given that the older generation are now starting to retire, and really we're, like the people in the room today, we're the ones that are coming into those C-suite senior roles, but then underneath us, we've got the millennials and whoever comes under the millennials, and the challenges we're no doubt all experiencing around productivity, flexible working arrangements, all these things like that, and what we can contribute. So that was kind of the nature of that discussion. We just want to take that a little bit further and a bit deeper today.
And we'll move through quickly with our slides, because really the joy of these discussions is hearing from you and how you're navigating some of these issues. But James, I might just get you to jump to the next slide, because really when you think about people risk, we do really need to move beyond compliance. And what I particularly loved about this quote here is that it came from 2007. And I will share this article. We will share this with you after today's session. But the article is actually called The Moral Hazard, and it was about people risk in business environments. What fascinates me is that in 2007, here's the article talking about climate change, threats of pandemics. Who was talking about pandemics in 2007? It was 2019 before, another 12 years later before we actually really saw a fully blown global pandemic, terrorism on the rise, the emergence of new technologies, huge economies, global job market. And, expect the unexpected, that kind of, the world is really changing. When I look at this article, yep, true, swine flu was a thing. Thank you, Andrew. But it really didn't hit the world in the way that COVID did.
Avian influenza, yeah, there's another one.
Yeah. But this article here that we'll share with you was really, it was quite forward-looking. And I'll just get you to flick over then, James, because this one, I've used this quote a lot in various training sessions, and James and I used it when we were doing fraud risk assessments with businesses. But it's just such a great quote, 'cause it's so true. People are your greatest source of risk, whilst a little bit, negatively framed, I guess, because they're also the way that you can seize opportunities and growth. So people are also your greatest asset. But they do have accidents, behave stupidly, make mistakes, and do fraudulent things. So every person that manages someone is a risk manager. So that kind of, that's the context of that particular article, which we will share with you, coming from Australian Human Resources Institute in 2007.
And I think what probably frames it really nicely as well, it's a great quote I found from a guy called General McChrystal, who, again, I'll send the link, who says that our decisions are often directed less by logic than emotion, with fear being the most dominant. And I think that's especially true when we're talking about the people aspect of risk management, that we kid ourselves into thinking that we're really making data-informed decisions, but ultimately any piece of risk management activity involves people, and people, let's remember, are primarily probably driven by emotional-based decision-making more than anything else, despite what I think we all, like to tell ourselves.
Despite all the decision trees under the sun.
That's right.
Yeah. So when we think about, firstly, we tried to, as I said before, cut it down into just a sort of risk to workers, risk of worker actions, and general people risk. Think about risk to workers. So we know that there's a lot of regulatory change in this space. So firstly, the psychological safety, and all of us, all organisations, we've now got this positive duty to manage not just the physical safety of workers, but their psychological safety. And we're also seeing this sort of overall decline in mental health. And we know the personal space and wanders into the workspace, of course, but then declines in mental health can be about work pressure and stress and work design as well. So we've kind of got these things all interacting. And then we've got the new Respect at Work laws. And again, that's regulatory change there, giving all organisations that positive duty to manage. And that's been enforced now, I'm going to say 2022, early 22. So all organisations should now be, well advanced in addressing how they're dealing with that regulatory change with regard to Respect at Work laws. And then other risks to workers. And it was interesting, I was reading an article, obviously, and the intergenerational report. It talked about the ageing workforce, and we know we're ageing, our workforces are ageing, but they were talking about it in the context of accidents and injuries. So thinking about your WHS program might be good now, but how is it accommodating older workers as they stay in the workforce and need to work for longer and we're aging? What do we need to do to our WHS programs to accommodate that?
Yeah, and I
And
think
then,
that,
yeah,
yeah,
sorry, you go.
No, you go. I'll jump
Okay,
in.
I'll just finish the last dot point there. And then there's this occupational violence and aggression that crosses a lot of industry sectors, but you could almost sort of draw the link between that sort of the COVID environment, post-COVID, the decline in mental health and the rise that we're seeing in occupational violence and general aggression. And so that impacts then the psychological safety of our workers and can lead to their decline in mental health. So all of this is kind of linked together. But I guess that was our case of, you know, risks to workers in sort of summary. So I'll hand over to you, James.
Yeah, look, I just think what we've seen to give you an idea of how we see it in the real life world of doing work for our clients, and this is probably obviously as we go into discussion where we want to hear similar perspectives for you guys. So I think one of the continuous issues that we still continue to see, and it does always jump out as mining being a sector where it's prevalent, but I don't think it's not only prevalent there, is that we're in intensely unethical, unprofessional, and or even bullying behavior is readily accepted by organizations because it's often dished out by very high value employees, whether that's a particular division of the business that's a hugely high return dollar value division of the organization, or a particular individual that has exceptionally unique skills or value to the organization.
That's very senior.
That's right. And they're almost treated like a sacred cow. And you'd think that 2023, you don't really see, I would say you would not expect to see that. But we tend to see, you know, even in sectors like the for-purpose sector, that there's this, this sacred cow type mentality, which leads to organizations tolerating behavior that otherwise would not be tolerated. And then the impacts, as Bronwyn stated there, to all of those categories. And pretty much you could tick off each one of those as interacting with an organization that allows or facilitates that sort of behavior. And where it leads to is a whole world of hurt, both in terms of non-compliance costs, reputation risk, and staff turnover. So sorry, Bron, I'll hand back to you.
No, all good. So then if we have a look at the risk of worker actions was the next kind of basket or category that we came up with. And this comes back to what James talked about before around your culture. And then, you know, that gives you sort of that rise to that poor ethical decision making, and we've seen what that can lead to in terms of reputational risk, but employees or workers making poor decisions that then impact your business. And then other risk of worker actions includes things like conflicts of interest. We see that play out in Parliament, I guess, quite a lot. There's other many and varied case studies on conflict of interest and what that's done to organisations. Probably only got to look at PwC, be the latest big example there, where there was a definite conflict of interest between that partner and what he had learned at the ATO and how that played out. And of course, you know, what's interesting there is then all of the other big four consulting firms kind of starting to fess up a little bit there. But other worker actions could be things like fraud, theft, corruption. And we know that sort of, as I guess, you know, it can be impacted by tightening cost of living rises, financial pressures can contribute in this space. And that's certainly a business operating environment we're in right now. But there's sort of, you know, those things are definite risks of things that our workers do. Inappropriate use of AI. It's going to be really good to have the conversation next month about a very specific breakdown around AI and our use of AI, but organisations are now trying to quickly catch up and work out how they're using it, and if they're using AI in the workplace, but inappropriate use of it can contribute to poor business outcomes. And then generally workers not following workplace policies and procedures. So if you look at it sort of the second basket, it's really about things your workers do that give rise to risk in your organisation.
Yeah, and so I think the whole sort of, you know, age-old quote here of culture is what happens when no one's looking. that kind of thing. I think that's really what this this speaks to here. I was just going to call out there, even though it's from the from the accounting sector, if you haven't already checked it out, and again, we'll drop the links into the email, the APE standards for the accounting services sector, there's 110 and 325 that specifically deal with the requirements for accounting practices around culture and conduct frameworks. It's very rigid, but if anyone's looking to enhance the way that their organisation, even if they're not in accounting, manages this type of stuff, it's actually really worth reading because it gives you like a formula and a structure similar to really any other standard. So, and they're all publicly available. So we'll send the links to those, and there's certainly some food for thought in those. And then with the whole conflict of interest issue, again, something we've seen even in the last 2 weeks with a client in the for-purpose sector, and we're bearing in mind, I think if I get the statistics right, Bron, the biggest operators in the for-purpose sector nationally still only comprise, is it 3% or 2%?
No, it's about 8% actually.
Yeah,
Sorry,
okay,
but it's
so
about 8% of the
let's say
market.
they're 5 and 3 or something like that. So let's say 8% of the national market for purpose, which includes disability, aged care, all those sort of things. So it means that you've got 92% of the market there that's made up of largely a mixture of very small to medium-sized operators. And what we've noticed is that even in the big players, and we work with one of them, conflict of interest is still a huge issue with them. So they've got family members and sons-in-law and sisters and wives and husbands that all scatter across both the board and the senior leadership team. And the problem is that they continue to be really inconsistent in the way they manage it. Not to say that they can't run an organisation that has those relationships, but how they actually manage the perception of those relationships has been a huge issue we've dealt with.
It's very tricky for them.
Yeah, in the last month. And so more about the optics externally to the organisation or the optics downwards in the organisation. The perception's been created that you're part of this cultural elite if you're in a certain circle, and everyone else is excluded from the club. And that perception has also now leaked out into the market, which has caused some significant issues for them. It's actually not an issue in the way you'd think it is, but I think that's just something to consider when you're thinking about these conflict of interest people.
And a lot of that is about, how people are recruited, recruiting your brother, recruiting your mum, placing them on the board without proper, due diligence and process and being transparent about it. And those sort of smaller organisations are definitely at risk in terms of that. So, yeah, I totally agree with that one.
Yeah. Okay. And then moving on to the
inappropriate use of AI, Stu, to everybody. I'm happy to do a very quick on that one and happy for everybody else to weigh in because I'm sure everyone's now starting to examine how their organisation is using AI. But in my experience, Stu, what I've seen more recently is the use of AI to write responses to things or conduct research. And we know that AI, and we'll get into this in more detail in next month when we have the particular topic on it, but AI itself, if it doesn't know the answer, will make something up. And using AI for to write research and do those sorts of things would not always be appropriate at times because it'll get it wrong.
Yeah.
What it does do really well, if you've written it in, for our example, we wrote a case study and we asked AI to refine it for us. Did a very good job of that. But I wouldn't ask AI to go and delve and get facts for me on anything because it's going to get it wrong. I was going to say, what I'll do, Bron, is I'll flick that. It's going to end up being a fair few links on after this month, but that's good. That's what we want. An article that Lockie from Yarno sent us, and I think Cole, you've probably seen it as well in terms of HBR article about what I think it's titled like generative AI anxiety, and it just breaks down a whole bunch of the sort of perception versus reality misunderstandings about the current, let's call it, iteration of AI. And the big one that got me was it gives you the impression it's having a conversation with you when it's actually not. It is actually just making a coordinated guess on what words would fit based on the chain of conversation. And I feel like once you get your head around those types of things, and there's a bunch of them in that article, you kind of have this like brain explosion
moment. So I'll definitely add that to the list. And Stu was just going to go back to your comment saying the number one risk spoken on the ground is people or other workers. Totally. Like look at any industry that's still labor heavy. It's always that human error related risk seems to still be the crux of it. And then I think looking at sectors that have gone to these complicated and detailed incident investigation and causation models, and I can see, Becky's there from rail as well. You can sort of see why they've had to move away from this concept of behavioural errors being kind of the root cause of things, because there's so many other system-related failures that you can start to actually look at in order to try and counteract almost the assumption that people are fallible and will make errors. Yep. So sorry. And so what Cole's saying, the hallucinations
are real. Yeah. And look, that's why we felt that use of AI and how it can impact us in the workplace from a legal perspective, very, very excited to be having that conversation next month. And thank you now, I'll say in advance, to Caroline and the Dentons team for hosting that one.
Absolutely. Can't thank you guys enough. So
Okay, and then I guess to kind of summarise here, now if we think about people risk to our business operations generally, we're still all grappling with the hybrid work, the flexible arrangements. Do we bring people back? Do we not bring people back? How do we bring them back? Do they want to come back? All of this kind of stuff. And there are also certain requirements now through the Fair Work Commission around offering flexible arrangements and what you are and aren't allowed to do. So we need to consider the legal implications now from hybrid work. It'd be also good, and we should send this one out as well, James, but I noticed the other day Safe Work Australia issued new guidance material related to work from home and flexible work. Okay. So we'll make sure that we get that to you. But that in of itself remains a risk in terms, because often I think it's perceived that the power balance sits with the employee, not the employer. And how do we juggle that? But also then how do we ensure that people are working from home safely, et cetera, et cetera. So and I think that generated a lot of the conversation in June. So I'll move through these points and I think we should open it up to the floor. Recruitment turnover, and we've got there both quality and quantity. Can we get enough resources and can we get the right skills? And that seems to be an issue for many organisations right now, a lot of people facing that one. The impacts of AI and other technology, specifically on work design, and think about it in terms of future skill sets. So how we do work now, it's probably not how we're going to do work in the future. And a risk to us is that we're not forward looking enough. So what was interesting, and I'll just share this one very quickly with you around work design. I was at a meeting this morning with Adam, and someone was talking about their printer and how they do printing and the cost of toners and cost of printing paper. And to be honest, that printing in of itself is probably going to be irrelevant very soon. Organisations need to be looking forward and going, well, how do we design our work and what are we going to do? Because is that something, are we printing paper continually into the future, but particularly when you think about things like worker expectations, climate change and ESG. So, so there is that. Then if you think about ESG and climate change, our workers do have, and the younger generations coming through will very much have a strong view about who they want to work for and what is their stance in this space. And so we need to be thinking now about that one. Is your organisation attractive to work for? If you're working in coal right now, you might be struggling to get resources. Use of contract workers, fixed term contracts. We know that there's been change again through the Fair Work Commission in relation to contract workers and how long you can use fixed term contracts for. And, I worked for the state government for a while that someone was on a 12-month contract for about 8 years. It's no longer permissible to do that sorts of things. So there's more risk to us there, how we engage people, regulatory change, and then that culture piece around risk-based thinking. So anyway, I think that's enough chit-chat from me. James, I'll hand over to you, but they're the risks that we talked about when we started brainstorming this and knowing what we know is going on in everyone's business environment right now.
Yeah. And look, without...
Is climate change real? Thanks, Stu.
I love it. I love it, Stu. And
is it right up there with the tooth fairy?
That's right. And I answered, I liked Andrew's comment about, is it, they've been saying that since 1989 in terms of, what do you call it, printerless society. So no, look, I think what we want to highlight there is, I don't know, because we're all pretty senior people in our organisations, and I'm being facetious and not meaning to be ill-intended. What I find in general in this world now, we live in this like space where we're constantly bombarded by models and really helpful advice on how to like manage your people. And like, I feel like if it was all as easy to do as what those that are espousing it to us would suggest, we wouldn't actually need human resource departments or work health and safety people. So there's some sort of like gap there. And I feel like the problem is where we sit, and look, we're not speaking for everyone, there's just nothing but white noise that comes at us out of that space. And it's always like, the 6-quadrant model to this, and the Heinrich maneuver model or whatever. And you just like, just shut up. Like everything that a lot of us don't or didn't used to like about HR people feels like to me just boils up there. And I just want to go like, just.
You're not maligning our HR brethren, are you, James?
I am a little bit, but.
I can't do that's my background.
I know.
My peeps
like
till I cross to the dark side.
Yeah. But so, and I think that's so. I am being facetious there. But so if you take the criticism of that away, I feel like in general it would be fair to say that there's just so much noise and heat that comes out of this space. It's really hard to actually work out, one, what's useful, but also two, sifting out all these models and actually going, well, what can I actually do and apply in a practical sense? We spent a bit of time jiggling around all of the current crop of models, and one of the better ones that I've come up with that I actually think makes reasonably good sense for once, and it isn't written in rhetorical allegory, like, if you want people to invest in your organization, you need to invest in people. I'm like, thanks, genius. If I hear that again, they're going to get like sprayed on Twitter, that's for sure. So this was a Tim O'Neill model, courtesy of a Forbes article, and again, we'll send this out. He's kind of almost secret sauce model to actually, he's not saying eradicate people risk, but let's say minimize the impact of people risk. His sort of 6-point model is cultivate culture. There's a heap underneath that. And again, we'll send the article, but cultivate culture as in actually spell out what you want your culture to be, because too often we see that organizations fail to define the culture they want and they let the organization sort of organically create it themselves, and it's never usually where they want it to be. So actually spell out what you want in your culture, train your managers. And I feel like, again, Brian, that's such a consistent thing we see, no doubt you guys would as well, actually train your managers on the reality of critical skills around people. So, like having tough conversations, giving feedback, managing performance, documenting underperformance. That is probably the number one thing we see in most of the sectors we work in that's just never done well, the training and equipping their leaders to actually do that. Communicate better in a meaningful way, implement a health plan. And that, I know that sounds a bit airy-fairy, but what the rider on this is, implement a health plan that's actually driven directly out of your workforce requirements rather than you telling them what you think they need. So the ones we've seen work really well are where the workers have actually said, look, this is what we'd actually like support with, and they've gone through a meaningful process to deliver that. Build brand awareness within your team in terms of the accepted standards of culture and conduct, and do it properly. And then obviously measure the impact of it. So if you don't quantify it, it's absolutely irrelevant. And again, that people risk space or people space can be really vague. People often don't quantify it. If we're all sort of real world risk people here, you've got to quantify it for it to have any meaning or to be able to judge its impact. So again, I'll send that one in the list, but that was one of the ones that we liked. That was actually kind of a useful takeaway to segue into discussion with the group.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, so what we'd love to hear is first and foremost, what has anything changed for anyone? Like, does anyone want to share, has a new people related risk emerged that they didn't anticipate, or has the landscape shifted in a way they were blindsided by? Or is it just situation normal? Can't get people, can't keep people, everyone wants to be paid more for doing less, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. Tell us what you think.
I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah.
We had recent experience of course, you'd be aware of this, people refusing to be vaccinated
Yep.
in a remote environment with a population that's highly at risk
Yeah.
to things like COVID. I was on the periphery of that, but the organisation took a fairly heavy line on it, and people left or were asked to leave. It was interesting to see how that played out.
Yeah, because that went right through to a commission, didn't it?
I think it did, yeah. I sort of lost track of it, but a few individuals were removed, and I had a feeling that if it wasn't that, there'd be something else that would get them moving along. But that was a very convenient point at which to execute the departure.
Well, I guess whether you like it or not, Andrew, that would be a, like expressly and explicitly demonstrating the culture you want to cultivate in the organisation. That if you're working in a remote Indigenous communities, there's no wiggle room for certain things like that, and that's probably an example of one of them, like a bit of an unbreakable expectation.
Yeah, there's no possibility of that risk, I think, being acceptable.
Yeah,
in that
that's
environment,
right.
Because it would have been like a wildfire going through the joint.
Yeah. So,
we had a similar issue at the special school that I sit on the board of, where we had teachers in allied health that refused to be vaccinated, and for some of our most vulnerable children, same thing, that we had to move them on. It was challenging.
Yeah. Is anyone struggling to get resources at the moment? I'm really keen to see where this is at, because I've heard some noise about sort of, maybe the tables turning a little bit, and maybe that the power imbalance that was more towards the employees is starting to settle down a bit. Is anyone experiencing that, or are we still in a place where the power really sits with the employees to dictate what they will and won't do? I'm keen to hear what you think.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that quite a few clients who struggle to find the resources, struggle to find the staff, and they sort of accept bad behaviour because they're worried if they try and manage it, who are they going to get to replace them? And it's not a good culture for the workplace, because other employees see that sort of behaviour being accepted, and it does create dramas.
Yeah. Would you say, Adam, is it because we've seen a trend on that sort of line where organisations that have got the resource base to do it are making let's call it a structured or conscious move towards internal capability development, understanding that, this person might not be anywhere near that capable yet, but we'd probably rather invest, if they've got an appetite for professional development, rather invest in growing them into a role than going externally to the market, knowing that you're exposed to those kind of elements?
Yeah, sometimes it's more of a hands-off. They don't try and manage the situation. It was just this morning I was speaking to a mechanic who had an employee that wouldn't be told what to do. Very good mechanic, very specialist. And he said, I've got to try and manage him. It's the right thing to do. And the guy resigned, and he was really upset that the mechanic resigned because it disturbs his business. So sometimes the hands-off approach appears to be the best approach.
And it's hard because we've seen it, and you guys that have worked in or around government agencies have probably seen the same as well, that there's that people, what do you call it, key person risk issue, where because of let's say the nature of how some government departments work, individuals amass huge amounts of organisational knowledge, and then they covet it, and then they use that as a mechanism to prevent themselves being moved on or moved out, because they're often cunning enough to know that let's call it devolving the information would potentially expose them to not being, because certainly some of the worst sacred cows I've seen have been in government agencies that have got as you said, highly specialised skill sets that no one else in the organisation's got, and so therefore they get allowed to get away with things that other people would not, behaviourally. So yeah, interesting. Just Cole's had to jump off, and I think I don't know what's happened to Daniel. It looks like it's maybe glitched or whatever. And so Stu, I know you've got huge exposure to the construction and mining and other sectors. What are you seeing any sort of common trends in that space, in those type of sectors?
What's happening in WA as well?
Yeah.
WA is still very
Hey, Daniel.
employee kind of driven. There's just no work here. They're trying to get people from overseas non-stop, and that's all industries as well. That's not mining or construction or anything. And in the US as well, we've got a lot of US clients where they can't find people. They get illegal aliens. I don't know if that's a inappropriate term, but they speak a lot of Spanish into Risk Talk, and we find that they love that. But they get a lot of people coming over the borders and stuff like that. Just because they can't find people to do the work. And that's government organisations as well, getting these people in as well. So it's not even like specifically.
It's not even
like
just small
small
businesses.
private. Yeah, it's not just small businesses. They're like massive organisations getting people who are illegitimately working across the border. One of the things you mentioned before, especially around the COVID jab, and this might be and it's got me thinking recently. It's like so many people who are the anti-vaxxers, like they get labelled in a big way, like kind of these kind of numpties, they're anti-vaxxers. But they're so passionate about it. Like some of my mates, they're like massive anti-vaxxers, and they've ripped up their whole lives, quit their jobs. They've got young kids at home, and they all do it because they don't want to get a little needle in their arm. And I'm thinking, what are you doing, you idiot? Like, is it really worth all this? But they're so passionate around it, and then they also get labelled that way. Then that could also create kind of hostility within the workplace, and then it kind of feeds on itself and goes round and round, which can create an even greater risk for a business as well. But I haven't seen anything is like more so into the psychology around why are these people so passionate about that, and then trying to explain that to the rest of their workforce to say, well, this is the reason these people think that they shouldn't get it. Like maybe have a bit of sympathy for them or a bit of empathy for them in that way. I just don't know. I haven't seen it. It's always been what an idiot they're like, kind of.
Well, it's not as foreign as what you would think. Like, it's an issue we've seen crop up consistently in the disability sector, even now, definitely. And then absolutely, like you said, and Carolyn's probably got a perspective as well, is that, that absolutely can create a division and ultimately conflict and hostility in the workplace, because there's a perceived threat to other workers from those that are vaccinated. There's a perceived victimization from those that aren't. It doesn't seem to essentially create a harmonious work environment.
We've seen two sides of this. So the COVID piece obviously brought it to the fore. And so the school that we run has 150 really vulnerable children in it, with all sorts of health issues, hence it's a special school. But we've seen that flow over into, I'll call it the usual course of vaccination. So the flu vaccination pre-2020 was not controversial. It was a requirement of the job. Everyone at the school had the vaccine. Every educator at the school had the vaccination. We come 2022, we're back to normal. We've got people who previously had the flu vaccine who now don't want any vaccination that the government prescribes. So we've seen this flow over into some sort of autonomy in terms of what they will and won't have, and it's been a key requirement of their job for 15 years. So we've had some pretty interesting things to handle, and it was almost easier in COVID because it was government mandated, full stop, whereas some of these are independent schools, Queensland required, or policy requirements because of the vulnerability of the children. So that's been really tricky to handle. And then on the flip side, we've had parents, certainly during COVID, who wanted to know which teachers were or weren't vaccinated because they were worried if they fell into that anti-vaxxer camp that somehow there was going to be transference to their precious children in the classroom. And that came up to board level as a strategy piece, because the staff just put their hands in the air and went, we don't know what to do with this. And behind closed doors, the board also put their hands up in the air and went, what are we doing with this? It's been tricky on both fronts.
Because there's privacy considerations there as well.
Absolutely.
All of that, and there's a lot of regulation in that space, and you don't want to start crossing into that either.
No, so it was a landmine, and we had parents withdraw their children from the school, which was peculiar because every other school had the same issue, because we wouldn't tell them which teachers weren't or were vaccinated before that became a mandatory requirement. It's I'm pleased we're not still in that space.
I'm keen to hear from anybody if they've come up with any creative solution to partnering with others, even to find skilled workers. If anyone's sort of got anything that they'd like to share in that space, because this seems to be an ongoing issue in lots of industries, is just finding people, but finding skilled people. And I was wondering if anyone out there is doing anything creative or seen anything creative around how to solve that one.
Seems that more and more people are willing to use people like me of no fixed abode, if you know what I mean. I know some senior people who've left high flying.
You have a house, Andrew. You're sitting in it now.
Oh, you know what I mean. Where do I work? Yeah, I don't know. It depends on the day. In fact, today it depends on the hour. And I know some senior consultants who are leading partnership roles and directorships to start doing the same thing. And there's a hunger for it. I know a place that we're both familiar with up north, and they've had key vacancies now for 12 months. And they're basically saying, well, bugger it, not going to look here anymore. I'm just going to try and get people on an hourly rate to do the job.
Yeah, and I think that there's certainly, from our business perspective, we've seen a growth like that as well. So, you know, getting others, outsourced others to do the work.
And probably I'd call out huge skills deficit. I don't know if that's the other state. Work health and safety, humongous skills deficit right across the board. Like we're helping a mining company try to recruit WHS professionals at the moment, and it's pretty difficult. It's a bit like the single guy theory. Those that are available you don't want, and those that what do you call it? Those that you want aren't available. That's really the.
Don't think that's gendered. Just
Oh,
clarify.
okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, you're
Single
right. Harold.
person.
Single person theory. Yeah. Okay.
Sounds like my 20s.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you know I'm not talking about me? So, yeah.
There's actually a Seinfeld episode of that where Jerry asked George why he's still single. You should Google it.
Yeah.
The ones that I want don't want me, and the ones want me, I don't want them.
That's right. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else is experiencing that, because I would say, based on what we're seeing in the sectors we work in, it is impossible to get anything resembling talent. And then same as what we were talking.
We're still recruiting.
Yeah.
In our business, I still can't find.
Yeah. Well, even what we were talking about, Bron, with Oliver in Singapore, saying that those that do apply are then just making absolute bonkers demands, like saying, in the case of this mining company, they're a mining services company, WHS lead. I won't come over for anything less than 180K a year. And this is for someone that doesn't have a direct delegation, doesn't report directly to the CEO, doesn't report to the board, arguably doesn't actually make a specific and direct return on investment in immediately any tangible way, and they're demanding more than a registrar at a local hospital. I'm like, tell me that's not bonkers. So that's what we're seeing in that space, and I wondered if anyone else wanted to share if they're seeing those kinds of trends around certain professions or roles.
Should try the young lawyers straight out of uni.
Oh yeah, the I want. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah.
And you try and train someone up, and they get to a level, and then somebody else pays them big dollars and leave.
Yeah, we've had that challenge,
around.
I think, in rail, particularly in some areas. But I guess we've tried to make sure we have that career path now, because we had that situation where, say, particularly signal technicians, we would train them up and they would just move on.
Right.
Whereas now we make sure they've got a longer term career. So we find we lose less, and I think that's been a good strategy. And probably on the safety front, that's probably been our approach too. We can't get people, with the skills and experience in all the areas we need. So we look for some, and we look for people that we can develop. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, but Beck, you guys do seem to do it quite well, because from all the external optics we hear or see, it certainly does reflect what you're saying and what you see in the market in terms of, certainly you guys particularly, but the sector seem like they're quite committed to developing their people, all that sort of stuff in terms of retention.
Yeah.
I
think it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
I think it's been a pretty good strategy.
Awesome. We've got 8 minutes to go. Has anyone else got any, come on, give us the controversial perspective. We should just sack them all and appoint 457 visa workers. We should
No more
outsource.
millennials.
Yeah, we should offshore our entire business to the Philippines.
I think being more flexible in location has been another thing, like using that flexibility of people working from home. Our businesses or organisations, right across the country, so quite open to people being based anywhere and just travelling as part of their work, rather than being very specific about where they need to be, and that obviously will, open up more opportunities and give you more candidates to at least choose from.
Okay.
What we noticed in the CBD, down there a fair bit, is the lack of vibrancy, I guess, in the CBD, and the cafes and all the support services that would support a commuting workforce into the Sydney CBD, and how they're suffering. So the flow-on effects to those businesses has been quite significant.
Well, what about last week? I was directly opposite Hyde Park. I couldn't get it in the CBD of Sydney. I couldn't get a coffee before 7 a.m. I was like blown away. I was like, what?
Sydney's shit like that.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
start with that.
Sound like someone from Perth.
Yeah, so I'm in our Sydney office today and have been down here since Saturday. So spent the weekend here, spent 2 days Monday, Tuesday at the Governance Institute conference.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I'm in our Sydney office today, and so I lead the Australian corporate team, and Sydney is our biggest centre. So I'm on a floor at the moment, and I can't see the next live person. So I'm here as practice group head. I've been announced. And there are 3 members of the 27 corporate lawyers in the office today, that even the lead arriving isn't enough to bring them in. I have noted. But you're right, it's absolutely dead. It's absolutely dead. And I'm going to sound a little bit uppity, professional services, that in my junior years, we used to dress up to come to Sydney, and I am in Sydney and I look overdressed in an office today where I've got jumpers and sneakers, and I'm like, I don't know what happened here, and I've been watching it for a little while and thought it would come back, and I do just sound like the snobby practice group leader, but it is stark, and I think it has everything to do with that morale and the cohesiveness of the team. So
I don't think it'll come back without effort, without actual strategies. I think sitting back and waiting for it to happen is not not working.
This isn't a modern issue, though.
No, that's not a modern issue.
So from day dot, Australians imported cheap labour from a lot of places. So the 4-5 visas and all of those visas are, and it's not unique to Australia. It's happening in America right now. In their conductor industry, they great issues getting appropriate labour even to build these types of facilities. So, they're under stress to import labour to even build these facilities from South Korea. This isn't something new to Australia or new to the world. This is driven by market economics, and the reality is that 4 or 5 years, I would think.
It was just reverbing there. Can everyone just check if they're not speaking, they're on mute, just so.
You just put yourself back on mute, John.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was just saying it was just echoing a bit. I don't know if anyone heard it. I was just double checking it wasn't me that was actually doing it. But yeah, agree, Daniel. And I think, there's 2 operators in the Hunter Valley at the moment in the mining sector that are doing exactly that. Like they're sponsoring 457 workers to come in. And Andrew's saying New South Wales farmers as well. Yeah, it's interesting. So I was like, what's the controversial question to ask? Is it, do we just dump all the millennials and just bring in enthusiastic young Filipino 457 visa workers? I don't know. I'm not saying that's the answer. Stu's saying, yep.
Yeah, bring the boomers back.
yeah. I feel like cut the pension scheme. Yeah, make them all work till they're 90.
It depends, though, because I think sometimes when you have to bring in workers, you've got to question the conditions, whether they are reasonable or not. Sometimes it's a skill thing, but sometimes it's just yeah, people have better alternatives, and why wouldn't they take them?
I know. And then the one that I always contrast it to, because we've still got some exposure to the merchant vessel and navy sector, I guess the merchant shipping sector, and they are predominantly Filipino workers that are really treated almost like slave labor by these Danish and Russian commercial container vessel companies. But talking to them, the reality is like they love it because they get great money compared to what they would get otherwise, and they send the majority of it home. And I don't know if that's
Thanks, Caroline.
but it does. Thanks, Caroline. But it does feel like slave labor. Like when you look at it objectively, you go, that can't be legal. You know, that kind of thing. Like 4 months
doesn't feel right,
at sea,
does it?
they get 1 day off every month. They work like 14-hour shifts in the, you know, in the engine room and stuff. You're like, that doesn't feel right. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, agree.
Alrighty. Is there anyone else got anything to add before we jump off today, or anything anyone like to raise? No.
Everyone
I
needs
think-
to come to Brisbane.
Yeah, next month in Brisbane Live, I think that's going to be great. I think the topic, so talking about AI and its impact on workers and the workplace is going to be valuable. Caroline Snow has actually got her senior manager. So Caroline's manager is coming to actually run that topic for us, and she's studied quite extensively in that space. So we're talking a lot of the legal implications of both using GPT, and then actually how it's going to impact us in the workplace, and some current court cases that are actually up and running in that space. So it's going to be a very interesting topic. So I encourage you all to be there.
But I think particularly relevant as well is that they're going to talk about the implications for the legal profession and the risk profession in terms of what that might look like, because we all know that there is people silly enough out there to try and get GPT to give you legal advice. And so if you step into the environment that's happening, what does that mean more broadly? Because no doubt, because we've played around with it, as some of you may have as well, around the work health and safety space, it appears to do a credible job with doing some stuff for you, but then I think you've always got to temper it against the what was Cole saying, the hallucination fallacy?
I didn't even know that was a thing till I read up on it, that if it doesn't know the answer, it makes it up, and they call it hallucinations. Jesus.
Amazing. What if it predicts the future? That's what I wonder.
Not Nostradamus.
Is it going to be bigger than is it going to be bigger than just GPT? Because obviously AI is a massive beast, like emotional analysis or even motion analysis. So with the way people walk to analyze like whether they're going to be doing things.
We use ChatGPT because it's quite sort of well known, but it's all generative AI is really where it's going to fit.
And I was going to say, all you AI adept gurus like you guys, Stu, like everyone in that space tells us that, you know, the problem is that this has been around for a decade or more. It's just that it's almost like ChatGPT just blew itself into the public sphere very quickly. Yeah. Awesome.
Alrighty, we'll get all this stuff out to everybody that was on the call, and thanks for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next month. We'll be in Brisbane.
Have a great month, everyone, and we'll flick it all out very shortly. All right.
Okay, take care.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.
No worries. Thanks for coming along, Adam.